Hello, I'm Paul Ontiguk.
And I'm Katie Walker. And Paul, I was wondering if you teach science in Alaska, could you give us some tips for how to make better connections from the Alaska Native cultural perspective in science?
That's a really good question and an interesting one. A part of what we always keep in mind is that there are so many different cultures, of course, that are represented in Alaska. It's more like Europe than anything. It's multiple languages and cultural groups and geographic spread. Uh, so I would be thinking about it more from Northwest Alaska and Inupiat perspective. But it is really important because there are some ways to connect better, and there are some common problems that might crop up.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, One is this larger picture, I suppose, of how we understand the world and how we structure it. And with the Western European system, it's understanding the natural world, animals, their relationship to one another is one way of doing it is through a taxonomy. How do we organize the relationship between different animals? This became more important as European exploration and empires are spanning the globe, and they're bringing back more samples of flora and fauna. You brought back unique flora and fauna from each of the places that you thought you discovered, so that you're keeping it from other European people. And so collecting unique plants and animals from those areas was a part of showing that you actually had discovered them. Well, these are piling up. They're just filling places and they're just unorganized. And so how do you compare that it's a unique animal from one to the other? And eventually, Swede helps to come up with this system. And the argument is based on their physical structure. Which ones are more closely related physically to one another? Mm-hmm. And so it's a physically based taxonomy, plants and animals and insects and all that. It's a different way of understanding the world than a traditional Inupiat or northwestern, northern, all the way over to Greenland view, Inuit or Inupiat. Best summarized, I think, for me, in a moment when an uncle of mine pointed out, just almost as an aside, that when a pack of wolf enter into salt water, they become killer whale. Now, in our system, you don't question somebody immediately when something's confusing you, or the expectation is that it's better if you can think your way through it and come up with your own understanding, because it's better for you as an educational experience. It's the opposite of the teacher starting out saying, this is what I'm going to tell you, and then they tell you, and then at the end they tell you what they said. Because that's seen as creating crutches, making a person's mind weaker because they're not having to go through the effort of making sense of something. And that's certainly was the case when he said, well, pack of killer wolves, when they go into saltwater, they become killer whale. I knew he wasn't like a big fan of Walt Disney or this sort of woo-woo view of native views of the world or anything like that. But at the same time, with the tone, he was making an assertion. And I had to think about that. Later on, he came back with other examples, and I finally realized that our view of the world, the way we structure the relationship with animals and plants and are not based on their physical structure. It's based on their relationship to one another and their position within the system. And that in saltwater, the relative position of killer whale approximates that of a peck wolf. And so that's the meaning of the relationship. So it's based on function within a system. And there's another example of that is rabbit. When a rabbit happens to drink salt water, it can become a seal. And by then I was on to it in some way, and I thought, well, okay. And one of the fun things about it was there was a physical connection. And I said that's why seal had the same split underneath their nose that rabbit did. But relationally, they are similar in where they are in this food system that exists. Now, with that in mind, when you get to the science class, the science teacher teaches the Western taxonomy as a fact, typically, science teacher. And they just want you to memorize it, figure it out, genus, and all of that. And it overlooks it. This taxonomy that Western Europeans came up with, it's not like the law of gravity. It's not a fixed thing. It's a human constructed piece of knowledge. So it's provisional. It's an idea. And the trick about it is that seeing some people who were watching students having difficulty at a university level, a science professor saying, well, it's okay if you have that view. And when I first brought this up as a reason why students who were otherwise doing fine academically weren't doing as well on this topic. And when I explained this difference, he said, well, that's fine. You can have whatever traditional views you want. But when you come to my science class, you have to learn the real way it is. And my point on that was that's not only insulting, but it's wrong from your view, because that's a construction of about reality. It's not reality. So a better way to think about it, and is more helpful, I think, for all students, particularly for Alaska Native students who have some traditional perspective on things, is that we have this Western system, and it's based on this physical structure. And then we have this relational model that's within a Inupiat culture about the world. This relational one is very important if you're going to live on and in a system for thousands of years. It's more important to have the relational structure down than to be looking at bone structure as a driver. So it also, I think, it makes it more interesting because it gives a student two platforms to look at the same kinds of things, which allows you to develop different kinds of questions. And that's how science goes forward. There's another level in which things are shifting on taxonomies, and within the Western system, or the modern system now, which is DNA. DNA is revolutionizing how we understand what are species and which ones aren't, and their relationship to one another. They're surprising us, and those physical taxonomies are being re-questioned because of DNA studies. So there's that part. There's a way in which the two systems are meeting one another. And it's interesting watching the Western system moving towards the Inupiat system from my view. And a part of it comes from people who are making connections about the interrelationships, a relational study that's becoming rapidly a part of mainstream Western science. An example of that is a science study by a scientist named Rickets, Ed Rickets. He's the actual person that Cannery Rowe's science person is based on, who does, collects biological specimens and sells them during the Great Depression. That's why he makes money. Well, Rickets was collecting tidal pool and coastal environmental species, trying to understand them better. And one of the things he did was he rented a commercial fishing boat, and they loaded it up with scientific equipment and bottles and whatnot. And the logbook officer for this scientific study of Baja California, going down the coast, was Steinbeck himself. And yeah, isn't that a pretty interesting thing to have done? And Steinbeck is Steinbeck, so he's not just writing, where we are on a certain day. He's got to turn it into narrative, and there's a lot of narrative in it. And along the way, by the way, this is a little trivia. He's recording along the journey. They stop in a village and they hear a story, a local legend, and it's about a pearl, and that becomes the basis of the little story that he writes later. So, but what Rickets is doing is that he was looking at Pacific tidal pools and realizing it's like a mini system, and they're related to one another, and he's trying to describe that. And this pushes forward what today is called, environmental or ecological science. Mm-hmm. And a book that he later wrote with a colleague named Calvin, Jack Calvin, is called Between Pacific Tides. And it's a classic work. It's a standard text. This is a key text in the history of developing the field. And it's based on more of this Inupiat perspective. It's connected. It's closer, in my mind, to the basis of our system of relational views of things. And it's just a treat to find that there's this connection. Silent Spring by Rachel Carson is another example, a key text. Before the promotion, the popularity of that text, people might look at an individual chemical, whatnot. They might test it on lab rats or something and then decide if it's safe or not. Then it gets dumped out into streams and whatnot, and people don't worry about it because it's already been tested for safety if it was tested. But what they weren't doing was looking at the impact once it enters into a broad stream and environmental system. And it's not showing that DDT can be safe to put on your skin or to put on water, but over time what it does is it has a long-term consequence, and it grows into other consequences so that upper level predators, as DDT concentrates into it, it affects their reproduction and the success of their egg laying. So what I see there is that there's this much more of a coming together in some ways. And it's a better way to understand the world, to be able to respect the possibilities and the intelligence that are within these different ways of viewing the world. And it makes science more interesting, and it makes it more connected. And I think that's the way we want to go.